Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we wrestle the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for, I believe, part 6 of a 13-part series as we travel through Harry Potter and the Phoenix Suns of the NBA. And we're here for chapter 16, 17, and 18. In chapter 16, we spend 20 pages reading about a group that has assembled for Harry Potter to teach them all. And we get to the point that, yes, we agree that Harry Potter should teach them all. That's it, JK. Really? The whole chapter for everyone getting together to decide, yes, we should get together. Awesome. Fantastic. Also, Jenny has a boyfriend. 17, no more groups or teams, and someone hates Hedwig. This is starting to look more and more like when a new regime comes into any place that a new regime comes into and is looking for supreme control. And finally, chapter 18, there is a super convenient room that Dobby tells Harry about, and they have a defense against the Dark Arts League. One note before I get into what I think is the meat of the matter here. All the suspicion towards Sirius by Hermione, who JK at this point likes so much that I'm finding her less and less interesting as a character, makes me wonder if the Sirius in the Flames is the real Sirius, if that is, if there's something strange going on with Sirius here. Perhaps he is trying to lure them to a different place off campus or something because it's not the real Sirius, it is instead an imposter, something like that. I don't know. Probably completely wrong. If you do address that in the comment section below, do not use my name because that would be a spoiler that I don't want to know about. If you do want to respond to something in the video and have me read it and react to it, start the comment with my name, ADRIAN, in caps, because then I will know that that comment is spoiler free and it is safe for me to interact with, because again, this is my first time through the series. I would prefer not to have spoilers or be accused of being spoiled because of guessing something. But I think that the real crux of the matter here is how much that this defense against the Dark Arts League reminds me of a writers group that I had when I was an undergrad, and really sort of draws my attention towards something that sort of Hermione points towards, with the importance of education being only what it is that we make of it. And as someone who has, from probably middle school on, grade school for the large portion of it, only attended schools that were considered subpar, I like to think that there's truth in this, and I've said this since high school, that education takes you only as far as you take it. And we'll get there a little bit in the story, but the first incarnation of this writers group was just 3 people. Myself, a woman named Kelsey, who watches the show, hello Kelsey, and a guy named Eric, who I am sure does not watch the show, but sometimes that's what happens when you spend a whole lot of time in such close confines with another and you're discussing something that you're passionate about. We met every Wednesday for basically an entire summer when we were undergrads, and each of us during the summer wrote 10 short stories, one every week, printed off, turned into the group to be commented on and discussed at the next group. That's how these worked. We only got one pass during the summer for a revision week, during which we would take one of the stories that we had written and had been commented on, we would revise it, resubmit it to the group to see what revisions had done for the piece, had taken away from the piece, etc. Just some, I don't want to say loose confines, they were very strict rules, but rules that we had all agreed upon, so that it did not seem like they were apprehensive. They were just, it was the group, that's what we did. It was a really good time. And we all took major leaps and bounds forward as writers, as readers, as critiquers. Every one of us came out of that summer a different literature than we had entered the summer, and by the end of the summer, we all hated each other. Kelsey only wrote soppy love stories. Eric only wrote stories with a protagonist who was a bump on a log, and I wrote the best stories, but I only wrote stories about weirdo loners who ended up dying in some violent fashion. Fancy that. The semester started and the group subsided. But eventually, when our interest in our classes had waned enough, we wanted to start up again. But through spreading the word of how useful the group was to us, by the time the group started back up, there were a few more members. And eventually, the group grew to, if I'm not misremembering this, about 15 people. It was much larger and much more regular, if you can refer to writers as regular, than the campus-sponsored group that did meet in the middle of the day on campus in a designated room with designated professors and student leaders. There were so many of us that we eventually had to scramble for a place on campus because my apartment was simply not large enough. Not unironically, in much the same way that it happens in these set of chapters, one of the members of the group had talked about a room in the library that I went to the library daily. I was in there every day for every day that I was on campus. I literally don't think there's an exception to that. I would spend time there between classes, before classes, after classes. It so much so that the librarian started talking to me about plans after college. Maybe I would inherit it from her, I don't know. But I had never been in this room. I had rarely noticed the door to this room. Anyway, we ended up meeting in there sometimes, and we met in a separate building that was the English building a few times. But we evolved still until there were 8 to 10 regular members, and I could fit that in my apartment. And at my apartment, there were obviously advantages to be had as far as not having to control the level of volume, not having to be there during set hours, having certain beverages at our disposal. And we would talk writing and literature, yada yada, until we were too tired or inebriated to go on, the latter of which happened far too often, to probably dastardly outcome. Flash forward, but it was so many people that had participated in that group. I dare say everyone, because I think I heard from anyone who showed up even once that they learned something, that they grew as a writer, that they grew as a reader, that they did not know there were more people as involved in writing as they were. Because especially someplace like, for me, St. Joseph, Missouri, or now in Kansas City, Missouri, I am forced to remember Christopher Hitchens when he was touring for his book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. He would often recount how he would look out in the crowd as he was touring in the southern United States, or where I live, which is known as the Bible Belt. And he said he would notice and recognize the look on these people's faces. He looked out in the crowd, wide eyes of them looking around, never having realized that they weren't the only atheist in existence, because it's so rare and very rare to be talked about in places such as this. But flash forward, I'm in grad school, basically mortgaged my entire life to move out to St. Louis and acquire $25,000+ in debt simply to pursue the dream, simply to have a designated place in which to write and grow and read and grow at that too, and basically become a monk. I was basically a monk for literature when I was in grad school. So I get out there, and the first quarter even, I try and try and try and try to establish a writers group, and there's no bites. No one wants to participate in writing outside of the confines of the classroom. No one has the time, no one has the desire, the effort. I would float the idea out there quarter and quarter again, and no one would come up to me. No one would come up to me. No one would come up to me. But Adrian, I hear you. It's grad school. You probably had class with mostly professionals who had careers outside of class, careers and families and jobs outside on the side of that as well. Some of them, sure. And those were the people who would open discussions about trying to figure out a time, trying to figure out a place, trying to figure out something that would be convenient, something that would work for them. And most of the people in these classes, the ones who did not come up to me, were not people with careers. They were simply people who had just graduated and were doing the next thing. And the part that really struck me was as it is regarding to extracurricular writing. Most of these people who claimed to be writers and were also assuming $25,000-ish plus in debt were struggling even to do the writing that was assigned for class, struggling even to produce what they had to, what they were told to do. And it reminds me, like, not to brag, because obviously I'm a nobody as a writer, but I had no problem doing that because I was already writing several stories at a time outside of class. And it reminds me of a study they did. If I can find the video that talked about it, I'll link it in the description below. But they graded two pottery classes. One pottery class was graded on turn in your best pot. The pot that you have that you think is grade A, baby. Turn that one in, we'll grade you on it. The other class was graded on weight. Every student had to produce 50 pounds of pottery in the class or they failed. You produce the 50 pounds, you get an A. You don't produce the 50 pounds, you fail. And what they found was that the group that produced the best pottery was the group that had to produce massive amounts of pottery, 50 pounds. Not the group that had to produce one really great pot. That wasn't the group that succeeded. The group that succeeded was the group that just worked and worked and worked and worked and innovated and got tired of making the same pot again and again and again because it only weighed 3 pounds and they knew they couldn't do this 8 times. They had to change it up. It was the group that had to create a massive poundage of pots. That's completely unbeknownst to me. That is the mindset that I had. I want to take this time, and it's not like I was jobless. I was working 30 hours a week just to have food to eat, because all of that loan money went towards the class. So I was writing and writing and writing and writing, and still. But for me, it worked out because I was doing all that writing. I took my education into my own hands and would incorporate everything that I took from class into my own writing. But that was not my only outlet. But it just struck me that no one wanted to participate in anything outside of that. And it is still, even that first iteration of Writers Group that was just 3 people, 10 stories, 1 summer, we showed more hustle and passion and outright determination and toughness than anything I found in grad school. And I am sure that from that group of 15, there are more people who still write than from my entire grad school phenomenon. Just to backtrack a second, it might sound strange to apply the word tough to something like writing, but if it does sound that way to you, I assert that you are not trying hard enough. It's super difficult to A, find the time, B, force yourself to write, C, take the extreme. Look, taking criticism isn't easy. Taking criticism on something that you've spent so much time and effort and your own brain power on is super difficult. So to be able to take that criticism and say, yeah, all right, we can go with this, and keep going, that's a form of toughness. And I think, if I may moralize, if I may extract from my own story, the moral of the story is that education can only take you so far as you are willing to carry it. Imagine life as a great big desert. Okay, big, scary, hot, few resources. You can die at any time. I like that story, but I wouldn't. Anyway, education is the backpack full of water that you carry on your back. You can drop the bag, sure, but you might not travel much further. It's possible through sheer determination. You can drop the education and go, 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 but you have to be very focused. You have to be very disciplined. You have to be willing to do things that no one else is. In the same vein, you can take the backpack off, set it on the ground, hop on the back, and guess what? The bag will take you nowhere. So even when you have that education, you have to rely on the same determination. You have to rely on the same sheer doggedness that someone who does not have the education has to adopt. And I think that that is the mistake that many people make, and undoubtedly the mistake that was made in my writing master's program. These people, I think, so far as I can put together, thought that just the osmosis of being in classes strictly for writing was going to make them a better writer. And this is one of the ways that literature can help us, is looking at something like this, and like these things that Hermione says, that, yeah, I want to be a scholar, but I also want to survive when old Moldy Voldy starts shooting people again, is that you can't rely simply on academe. You have to be tough. You have to be hardworking. And even then, sometimes you might not get anywhere. You still might die in the middle of the desert without any water. Look at me composing stories about weird loners who die violent deaths again. But anyway, for me, that is a moral that can be taken from these 3 chapters of Harry Potter, is that your education will only take you as far as you're willing to carry it, so go, go, go. That is all that I have for this episode. Hopefully it was not just mindless rambling, and I hope to see you in the next episode as we keep traveling through Harry Potter and the Phoenix Suns. So I know Kelsey's going to text message me and yell at me if I don't produce some embarrassing story of myself from this writers group. And seeing as Kelsey is so determined to think of me as the scary and irate individual, I think I will, instead of just telling a story, tell you how, if you create a writers group, you should handle something very specific. It was not an uncommon event for someone to come to the group unprepared. One particular event, look, I mean, that you can't have a writers group without relying on one another. That's what you're there for. So you turn in the story. If you didn't have your story to turn in, I'd kick you out for the night. You don't need to be here. If you didn't prepare and critique another person's story, I would not simply kick you out, I would embarrass you first. And I think that that's necessary, right? Sometimes it's not being a bad guy, it's being the guy that needs to exist. And unfortunately, this happened on the night that my story was exhibited, but had it happened on anyone else's night, I think that it is fair to say, and anyone who knows me knows, that I would have created the same scene. So there was a member who showed up to the group and had not done the reading, and was making comments, because you had to participate, right? It's not that I was giving grades, but I was watching. And he was making comments based on other people's comments. And still, at that point, my reputation for writing loners who were weird and died horrifically was intact. So I had turned in this story to the group, and it was being discussed, and this guy was making comments on people's comments, and I noticed it. I said, I won't tell you his real name. We'll call him James. His name wasn't James, it was Jesse, but we'll just call him James. So James, I called him out. I said, hey Jesse, did you read the story? Oh yeah, no, I read the story. How did it end? Wow, with a bang. Jesse, get out. What? Get out. So Jesse had also brought his girlfriend to be a part of the group, and she said, well, but what am I going to do? And I said, well, you can get out too. So I think that is how that situation absolutely has to be handled. Otherwise, it is possible, dare I say even likely, that you will have diminishing returns in your group from week to week. You have to rule with an iron fist.